Good morning. As I think was mentioned before, my name is Robert Alt. I'm the president and CEO of the Buckeye Institute, and I'm very pleased to be here this morning with this very distinguished panel. But let me point out something about, that you may not realize about this panel, which is it's something of strange bedfellows to have the ACLU, the Criminal Defense Lawyers, the Public Defender's Office, and the Buckeye Institute all on the same panel. It would be like having a press conference with, Ohio State and Michigan represented. And now I'll let you choose who is representing each side. I'll just remind you that I represent the Buckeye Institute. But I think it goes to the importance of this issue and the degree to which it brings groups that don't agree on everything together for common purpose. The Buckeye Institute strongly agrees with the other groups here that more attention needs to be paid to the legislature's role in creating, enhancing, and expanding criminal penalties. The ACLU's report highlights a problem that is occurring in Ohio and, quite frankly, at the federal level and in states across the country, the rapid expansion of criminal law. The Buckeye Institute is proud to have worked with Senator Seitz, former Speaker Batchelder, and a broad coalition, including the Ohio Prosecutors Association, to enact reform in the last General Assembly to require that new criminal laws contain the traditional guilty mind requirements in order to be valid. This was a major step forward and is, I think, a best-in-the-nation practice that Ohio enacted in the last General Assembly. But more can and should be done. We applaud the Recodification Committee for its work in examining the criminal code, not only to see if laws on the books should remain, but also to verify whether the penalties serve the purposes of justice. In a former life, I taught the criminal law, so I had the pleasure of beating certain notions into young students' minds. And one of the things that we always tell students is the old notion that ignorance of the law is no excuse. But when you look at how many criminal laws have been added to the code, it begins to strain credulity that such a notion still has credence. Perhaps we need a new presumption. Perhaps the new presumption should be among legislators, we have enough criminal laws on the books. If we operated with this presumption, we would actually take the sort of steps necessary before we passed a new criminal law. We would ask ourselves these questions, which I think the legislature should do before any criminal law is enacted. Do the benefits provided to Ohio justify the costs? Does the current law adequately address the problem? And will any changes made by this actually serve the interests of justice for Ohio and for the country? I would encourage the legislature to consider all these questions before any particular new crime is added to the books. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Barry Wilford from the Ohio Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. As the third speaker, I'm sure you'll be glad to know I have absolutely no prepared remarks. I, too, am very happy to be here, courtesy of the ACLU. It's absolutely thrilling at this stage of my career to see a bipartisan push for criminal justice reform, not just here in this state house, but in state houses all over the country, and even in dysfunctional Washington, where it actually might happen. And pursuant to that, I also have the opportunity for the first time in my career sharing the stage with the Buckeye Institute. It's a nice feeling. They're usually not among the usual suspects. The ACLU rounds up to put on one of these productions, so their presence here is meaningful. As part of the criminal justice reform movement, the legislature thoughtfully created the Recodification Committee, did that in the last General Assembly. And we have a retooled criminal sentencing commission that is concerned, their focus is on just the sentencing part of the criminal justice system. So there's a lot going on. And unfortunately, while they're studying the code as it exists right now, the criminal code, unfortunately, they are studying a moving target. Because meanwhile, all of our hard-serving legislators, for entirely honorable reasons, have their own interest in changing that code. And so we have 132 legislators who, I got an idea, what about this? And so we have bills making felonies out of simple assaults on substitute kindergarten teachers by 4-year-olds. No, it's not really that bad, at least yet. But it undermines the work the serious work that's going on by people who are taking a balanced approach to the criminal justice system. And by balance, I mean looking at multiple points of interest and trying to apply some reason to that, whereas most of the bills that are being advanced are very singular designed to address one thing, my thing. Our legislators are very hardworking people, and I respect them for the work they do, and I don't think they're going to line up to sign a pledge not to introduce or enact any criminal justice laws until the process completes its work, the Recodification Committee and the Criminal Justice Sentencing Commission. But I do think we need to ask them forcefully for their patience on this and their forbearance on going forward with their private bills. There are certainly more problems they can turn their attention to while this balanced review of our criminal code is going on, and wait and see what they bring us. And then see whether we might want to do something to protect substitute kindergarten teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for turning out today. Excuse me. My name is Gary Daniels. As Mike said, I'm Chief Lobbyist for the ACLU of Ohio. I think what you're hearing today from the assorted speakers in the ACLU is this is an effort that's born out of a certain amount of frustration. I've been with the ACLU now for almost 20 years. And 20 years ago, we were saying the exact same thing. 20 years ago, the prison population was pretty much what it is right now. That is vastly over capacity and dangerous to the people in the prisons, including the people working in the prisons. The problem is, over that last 20 years, and even before that, very little has changed. We did have some nice, albeit modest, reform with House Bill 86 and some associated legislation a few years back, but it did not meaningfully reduce the prison population, and indeed the forecast is that the prison population is going to continue to grow. The people sitting behind me, we've spent an awful lot of time appearing before legislative committees, meeting with legislators, attending events like this for years, and saying, you know, if we pass this bill that you're considering, you're going to add to the prison population. But that's not met with a whole lot of receptiveness when we do that. And so the report we released today about the State House to Prison pipeline is to help further illustrate this problem. As you all know, Ohio is on a 2-year legislative session calendar. Within the first 6 months of every session, they pass the budget, for the operating budget for the state of Ohio. They do that every 2 years during that time, which is to say they're very busy during that time with budget considerations. But it doesn't stop them from doing other things. And so here we have, in just that first 6 months, 54 bills introduced that would enhance sentences, that would create new crimes, and would take existing law and expand it to assorted related offenses and actors. That is an awful lot, and it's not going to stop, unfortunately. And this is not the end of our effort, it's not the beginning of our effort to call greater attention to this problem. We will continue at the ACLU to do this, to report on our findings, to examine legislation and point out where the problems are. And this is unfortunately a bipartisan problem. This is not something that Republicans are doing, this is not something this is just Democrats are doing, this is something that both sides are doing. And to the extent that they're ever asked during a committee hearing, how many people would your bill add to the prison population? Which of course is, sort of trying to use a crystal ball, but usually the answer is somebody will say, oh, I don't know, maybe 15 over the next couple years, or maybe 50 over the next few years are the calculations. And that doesn't sound like a whole lot. After all, nobody's introducing bills that are going to send like 3,000 people to prison next year. But it becomes, as we say in our report, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. Because 50 people here and 25 people there and 10 people there starts to, of course, really add up. And you see it when you look at the prison numbers, which are reported at least every month. You can see they report the capacity of Ohio's prisons, and they report the number of people who are in Ohio's prisons. And unfortunately, like I said, they very rarely change except to keep climbing up. And this is not, of course, only a frustration of ours here today. You can listen to representatives, including Director Moore from the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, testify before lawmakers, especially during budget time, and say the exact same thing that we are saying here today. So again, this is not a new issue. What we want it to be is a diminishing issue. This is an attempt to call more attention to the problem, and it's not just about felonies and people in prison, because a lot of the problems with the people being incarcerated, it also includes misdemeanor offenses and people going to jail. We should not discount the impact that misdemeanor offenses and people going to jail and having their license suspended and not being able to get professional licenses and housing and all of these other things. This is a problem at the felony level, it's a problem at the misdemeanor level. Our report doesn't even include those offenses that were minor misdemeanors, or laws that are passed for some reason with no criminal penalty attached. They make it illegal, but they make no penalty. So these are simply the ones that basically lead to more misdemeanor and more felony offenses. I urge all of you here today with an interest in this issue to hold lawmakers' feet to the fire and ask these questions and say, will you keep introducing these bills? Why will you keep introducing these bills? At a minimum, can we wait for the Recodification Committee to finish its work? We don't know what's going to come out of the Recodification Committee. I hope and anticipate that it'll be helpful, but I don't think it's going to solve this problem altogether. What solves this problem is the legislature being more thoughtful about what they're doing to Ohioans and society when they continually lock people up and overtax society and the prison system. Thank you.